Good Sunday morning, and thank you for watching Beyond the Headlines. There's more than one side to every story, and if you read Congressman Henry Cuellar's 54-page indictment, it could be read in a few different ways. Now, if you're Chris Flood, Cuellar's attorney, the indictment reads like a spy novel, a thrilling read, but just that, fiction. But if you're the federal government, you've written a decade-long story with chapters and characters spanning borders, with international figures, and a plot filled with foreign influence, bribery, conspiracy, money laundering, and more. And now you're trying to prove it in court. Both Henry Cuellar and his wife Imelda were indicted on charges of accepting nearly $600,000 from two foreign entities, Azerbaijan's state-run oil and gas company and a Mexican bank. In return, the indictment alleges Representative Cuellar used his position to leverage favorable outcomes for both entities in a variety of ways. Federal prosecutors say the payments were laundered through fake consulting contracts to shell companies owned by Imelda and their children. But both Cuellars quickly asserted their innocence. Here's what Henry Cuellar had to say after the indictment dropped.
Done is to serve by district, so the answer is no to that.
So that you didn't take any bribes at all?
Absolutely not.
Now, what can you explain the $600,000 in contracts that your wife received and you received via that?
Look,
can you explain it?
Yeah, all I gotta say is that there was, I saw legal advice. I saw two ethics opinions, and
Can you tell us what you saw opinions were? That she could work with the Azerbaijanis?
We will let the attorneys take care of it.
Well, you're a public official. What do you say to the people of your
And
district?
Like I said, I have sought advice to make sure everything was legal and ethical.
Okay, and then why did the Justice Department, why did the grand jury
and
indict you if it was legal then? Why did the grand jury?
Well, not everyone agreed with the indictment. Cuellar found an unlikely ally in a former president. Former president and current Republican presidential candidate Donald Trump weighed in and came to Cuellar's defense, saying in part that, quote, the respected Democrat congressman wouldn't play crooked Joe Biden's open border game. Trump went on to blame Joe Biden, the FBI, and DOJ for pursuing the indictment. But the case against Representative Cuellar received new developments this past week. According to court documents, plea deals are made for two men in cases linked to U.S. Congressman Henry Cuellar. Both men are identified as Mina Colin Strother and Florencio Lencho Rendon, and both men worked as political consultants at what time. Although Cuellar and his wife Imelda are not named in the Rendon and Strother plea deals, the case number for both individuals is found in the original indictment connected to Cuellar. Rendon is accused of taking part in a sham consulting contract. As for Strother, the documents state he allegedly understood that payments he received for services he was providing were coming from a project that was a, quote, sham. Both men struck a deal with the Department of Justice in March, and if convicted, could face up to 20 years in prison. Now, before we even get into this topic, in the interest of full disclosure, one of our panelists, Mindy Caso, did work for Congressman Cuellar back in the late 90s to early 2000s as press secretary. So having said that, let me introduce our panel, political contributor Sergio Mora, Mindy Caso, KGNS News anchor and investigative reporter, and Luis Villarreal, general manager for KGNS. There are Netflix series that I have not seen as good as this.
Yeah.
I mean, for real. It's just, this keeps getting more interesting and more interesting. Who wants to take a stab at it first?
Sergio.
I just it's interesting because of everything involved. I mean, just yesterday, the Wall Street Journal came out with a story highlighting the role of one of Mexico's probably second richest man, Ricardo Salinas Pliego, who owns Banco Azteca, who was the bank, and TV Azteca, who was the bank in question. It's all over the news. I mean, I don't know what to say other than it appears that it's going to move quickly. It took a few years from when we heard the raid happened. Everybody sort of had forgotten about it in that, well, I guess nothing came of it. All of a sudden, this huge bomb drops last week, and it's crazier than I could have ever imagined. And it didn't involve just Azerbaijan, it involved this bank in Mexico and this other whole sort of narrative, and that's where Colin and Lencho are involved, and they already pleaded guilty, and I think Colin's attorney said that Henry and Imelda should be worried about what's coming next based on what I guess Colin is saying. So, I mean, just let's see what happens. The trial supposedly is in July. So
Just to be clear, they pled guilty.
Yes.
What Congressman Cuellar is facing is an indictment. He's still innocent.
He
and so
pleaded
proven
innocent.
guilty, right?
They paid bail. They're out on bail. So it goes to trial.
Right.
And the ones that pleaded guilty don't go to trial.
Yeah.
How do you, I mean, first of all, I mean, I think part of the shock comes from Henry's popularity in the district, and particularly in Laredo.
Well, I mean, nationwide.
And nationwide, as former President Trump said it.
Yeah.
And I know you're probably going to find a way to disagree, but he is one of the most respected Democrats in Congress.
There's no doubt. One of the most influential ones.
And one of the most influential. And Henry has done enormous good things for not only our district, but in general and his tenure. And I think that's what is a little bit shocking. I just hope that whatever the truth is comes out and comes out as quickly as possible.
Yeah.
Because if this drags on for too long, and in fact there is innocence involved, people don't remember that. I mean, everybody just remembers the indictment and all these things. Now, and if there wasn't, I also want to say that, we need to remember that the crime is not getting caught. The crime itself is the crime. Yeah. And I think much of the time we spend arguing as to why did somebody get caught, and it's like, well, wait a second. The crime is what happened. How somebody got caught has nothing to do with it.
Yeah.
I hope for the best for Henry and his wife and his family, and for the investigation to move forward. But I think we need to wait until everything goes out, and
of course
there's a trial or whatever type of settlement or whatever there is. Henry was very adamant about his innocence and about the fact that he intends to keep his race open he is up for re-election this November.
Yeah.
He is opposed. He's got a couple of Republicans that are going to be in a runoff in the end of May. Mm-hmm. And so he is going to be opposed. And it's also interesting, the timing of it, because if it was in fact political, you would have thought that the machine that was spearheading this would have made sure it happened during the primary and maybe had an opponent ready on the Democrat side. Yeah. That's the only thing that doesn't jive about it being political, because if it was in fact Joe Biden directing this, which I'm just saying, if that was the case, why would you risk now losing your seat for a Republican?
Well, let's get into the political ramifications of this, obviously. This is the second member of Congress, the Democrats, that is under indictment. Bob Menendez, senator from New Jersey, is also under indictment with also just spy thriller stuff, like literal gold bars and cars gifted to him, and his wife is also very involved. So it makes it difficult for the Democrats who are battling Trump, and Trump, one of the signature accusations from Democrats towards Trump is like he's corrupt. Now Trump is like, well, you guys have two members of your party under indictment. Trump is under like 45 indictments, so he does want to push the narrative that, hey, Biden is going after all his enemies. Just like me, he's going after Henry, because Henry was very outspoken against Biden border policies.
And let's not forget, he's the only pro-life Democrat.
And he's the only pro-life Democrat as well.
I want to make sure, because we're running short on time, I want to make sure we give Mindy an opportunity to comment if she'd like.
It's really hard for me to say something because, people are going to say, one way or another, I'm either, defending because I worked for him or the other side. But I do want to say that working for him, in the amount of years that I worked for him, there was what Henry said about, and that struck me, what he said about checking with the ethics committee. That was something that he did regularly. In fact, I was very young when I worked for Henry. This was way back in the late 90s, early 2000s, and 1996, 97, so this was decades ago. He's the one that taught me what the term smell check was. Did it pass the smell check? You know, I had never heard that
The
before.
smell test.
The smell
Smell
test.
test.
Thank you. I mean, I was literally in my late 20s when I worked for him, early 30s. So when he said that to the reporters, that he checked with the ethics committee on more than one occasion, that to me, that's Henry. He does that. You know, he checks and makes sure that it passes the smell test. So I am very curious to see and to read what his side of the story is. The other thing that he had mentioned was that this was also in the statement that he had sent over, his attorneys had sent over, that they attempted to talk to the DOJ and they weren't allowed to. So there is, like you mentioned in the introduction, there is a whole other side of the story. We just haven't been privy to that. So, you know,
What's going to be
we need
interesting
see
here is
that.
how the two men who pled guilty play into all of this, because, you know, are these the fall guys now? Maybe they're the ones that they're going to, that, you know, the Cuellar camp is going to say, it was them, you know, Henry had no clue, or is this his, you know, is this the nail in the proverbial coffin? I mean, there's a lot of things that can still happen at this point.
Yeah, well, I mean, the situation with those guys is that they acted like the
middlemen.
The middlemen. The payments went from this entity to one, then to the other, then to the Cuellars. And so, I mean, it's interesting to see what the purpose of that was. And in terms of the politics also, you have the Republicans, the two Republicans. And it's interesting because Trump comes out, Henry's going to have Republican challengers in November, a Republican challenger. And Trump, who has a lot of sway with Republican voters, is promoting sympathy from Republicans towards Henry. I know a lot of Republicans are like, yeah, it was Biden, it's a setup. So, I mean, the political dynamics there are very interesting also.
And we still have a runoff for that seat. You've got Jay Furman and you've got Lázaro Garza. That's going to now be interesting how they plan to use this indictment, if they do, in their runoff race, and then how that's going to play in the November election. But some Republicans are smelling blood in the water. We're going to flip this seat. You know, this is our chance. But it's amazing. I've seen story after story about the support that Henry does have in Washington on both sides, and a lot of people are being real careful about how they say this. I mean, what happened when Menendez was indicted? Everybody was calling for his head.
George Santos is like, hey,
everybody run away
just
from
like
me.
me.
Nobody's running away from Henry necessarily.
The indictment is damning when you read it, and so it's going to be quite the challenge for sure on both sides. All right, when we come back, it's a big story, obviously. What comes next, though? As the government formally accuses Congressman Cuellar of these crimes, we talk to a lawyer with experience practicing in federal court on how the process will play out. That's next. Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines. No two cases are similar, especially if they deal with foreign governments and sitting congressmen. But what can we expect as the legal process plays out? With us this morning, we have Sergio Lozano. Mr. Lozano is a practicing attorney with experience in federal court. Mr. Lozano, thank you very much for being with us this morning and for sharing your perspective, or at least giving us some insight into this process.
Thank you for having me.
So what can we expect next exactly?
Well, the federal system runs a little different from your typical state cases. The federal judges have a real tight hold on the timelines that takes for a case to eventually go to trial and to fruition. But the defendant does have a right to a speedy trial, and that's why a lot of people are saying, well, July, is it that soon? I mean, technically, after the defendant has gone to his initial appearance, the government has 70 days to present the case to a trial and to have it a jury hear this case. But a lot of factors come into whether, well, is it time? I mean, July is, a couple of months away from here. Every case is different. I'm not privy to any of the information that is contained. Obviously, I'm not the attorney of record for this particular case, but every case is different. Like I was saying, you can walk into a case, it could be a mountain full of evidence that needs to be examined and looked through, or you can walk into a case where maybe there's just one file. Obviously, from looking at this indictment, this was a 54-page indictment, there's a lot of evidence that the defense attorney is going to have to look through. And so it's not going to take a couple of weeks. I think it's going to be an army of people that are going to look at all the evidence that the government intends to produce, right? So
this would be up to Congressman Cuellar's camp to request a delay? Would that be the next step if they think they need more time?
usually how defense attorneys work in general is we need to have all the evidence beforehand. What is the jury going to hear? What evidence the government has? And then we can make a decision on whether it would be in the best interest of the client to plead guilty or to take this to trial. I mean, the right to trial everybody has that's accused of a crime. And so it really all depends on how this information, is it trickled in, is it given to the defense attorneys right away so that they can have a look at it. It looks like there's going to be some accounting perhaps from what I'm looking at the indictment. There was a couple of movements made regarding money and so forth. So I think it all just depends on how fast the defense attorneys can get the evidence in their hands so that they can look at everything and make a decision, right?
Sergio, let me take you back a little bit, and to the extent that you can help me understand or help us understand what comes before the indictment. In other words, how do we get here? How do we end up with an indictment? Did somebody have to say something, or how does that work?
How did the investigation start?
Yeah, why does the investigation start?
Well, investigations can start in multiple ways. I mean, you can have confidential informants, people that have worked for the government. There's even paid informants. There's people that might have seen a crime and then they feel obligated to report it. So at some point, a crime is reported. Or if it's something that occurred in front of the officer's presence, well, I mean, that's how a great case starts.
So somebody must have reported this, obviously.
We can only speculate that somebody would have reported some wrongdoing, and perhaps the government from there applied for search warrants or wiretaps and so forth. So I know there was some talk about Mr. Cuellar's residence being raided at some point. Well, in order for the government to get into that house, they needed to have permission from a judge or a magistrate, right? So somebody signed off on a search warrant, and they thought there was sufficient evidence to find something in there, right? And so to answer your question, this could have come up any method, whether it's probably a confidential informant, maybe somebody saw something wrongdoing, which we don't know if there's any wrongdoing, right? And I want to be very clear about that. Mr. Cuellar and his wife has an absolute right to a trial.
Absolutely.
And so the government brings 54 pages of an indictment. Well, they need to prove that too, right? So, and that's where he's at right now.
Is there is all the evidence that the government has in that indictment, or could there be more evidence presented during a trial?
No, definitely there's going to be more evidence. The indictment is just the story of what the government intends to prove. Okay. The indictment has to be supported by evidence, either, what kind of evidence though is? Is it witnesses, videos, pictures? What is it that the government will prove the indictment? Because the indictment is just notice, hey, we're going to prove these things, right? And so they have to prove it, and they're tasked to prove that beyond a reasonable doubt in front of a jury, right? So, yeah.
And where is this going to happen?
What do you mean?
Where is the trial?
What's the
going?
venue?
Yeah, the venue.
I hear the venue is going to be in Washington.
In Washington.
Yes, that's from what I hear. I've kind of glanced over it, looked it over. I know that the news media has been reporting on it, and I really just read the indictment this past weekend. I just know a couple of the details, but like I said, everybody has a right to a trial, and the government has the task to prove that he's guilty beyond a reasonable
So
doubt.
just to put a bow on this, either it goes to trial, they enter a plea. Well, they've already entered a plea, correct?
Well, from what I hear, 2 people have entered pleas.
Right.
Right.
So, but Congressman Cuellar
He says not guilty.
He says not guilty.
Right,
So we
him
already
and
have a
his-
plea. So unless that changes before the trial, then the trial goes on as scheduled, unless the defense asks for a delay? Is that a
Well,
possibility?
the only reason that the defense will ask for the delay is if the production of the evidence the government hasn't
too much.
hasn't come in.
Oh,
Or maybe if it's too much,
Yeah.
maybe they just need some time. And the courts are pretty amenable to allow the defense attorneys to get all the evidence before them to make decisions. And it's only fair, right? It's only fair that, hey, they had all this time to gather all this evidence. When was that time? 2 years ago, maybe? So we would imagine it's a lot of evidence, right? So they want them to make a decision in a couple of months. Well, hey, it took you 2 years.
Yeah.
Give us time to siphon all this and look at this and really filter out and get to the meat of the thing, right?
Lozano, thank you very much. Mr. Lozano, thank you very much for your
Thank you
time.
for
We
having
appreciate
me.
it.
Thank you for having me.
All right, when we come back, we'll take a look back at the one thing our panelists cannot stop thinking about from the past week. All right, it's the one thing our panelists cannot stop thinking about. I'm kind of confused where to go now. Serge, I guess.
It's always
yeah.
me first,
No, I know, but there's a reason.
Last week in the war in Ukraine, there was news that a Ukrainian drone flew 800 miles into Russia to bomb oil refineries. And I mean, it just shows you the revolution in warfare and that drones are being used for everything. So there's drones being used right now that are 130 feet wingspan.
Wow.
They drop bombs, they reconnaissance, and then there's loitering munition drones that are like kamikaze drones that actually fly into tanks and buildings and stuff. And another thing I want to show off is I asked ChatGPT, hey, can you show me a picture of the drones that are being used right now? And this is what it came up with. Yeah, so
Okay.
pretty cool.
Okay, cool. Okay, well,
right.
you know me, I always do something that's not as deep as Sergio, but I'm excited because The Bear, season 3 of The Bear, they just released this yesterday,
Yes.
that's right,
Thank you,
anchor, producer. We love The Bear. It won so many awards, Golden Globes, and so many awards. It's coming back. We were worried that we weren't going to be able to see it anytime soon, but no,
Yeah.
it's all of the seasons are going to be down or uploaded,
Luis
downloaded,
has
whatever,
no idea.
on June
I only
26th.
started watching it. I
have
started
not.
watching it because you talked
I have
about
not,
it.
so
Yeah.
don't talk about it anymore. Let
Yeah.
me.
You know, I love
So
The Bear,
good.
but when is the rest of Yellowstone going to finish? That's what I want to know.
November.
That's what they say. I don't know. Luis, go ahead.
Okay, so this year, and I don't know exactly the date, marks 20 years that the Laredo Heat have been around in our community.
Wow.
And I just, I feel like Shashi Vaswani and his family do not get enough credit for what this organization does for, not just for promoting soccer, but for our kids, for our community. And so a big shout out to Shashi and his wife and everybody else involved in this. Thank you for what the Laredo Heat does.
And they
And their
just
new
built.
stadium
Yes.
will be
Awesome.
unveiling in a couple of weeks. So
Yeah.
be on the lookout for
Yeah.
that.
They add to the quality of life that we talk about here in the city as well.
Absolutely.
I mean, and think
Absolutely.
about all the pro organizations that we've had here that have come and gone.
This
They're
one has
stuck
stuck around.
I agree with you
Yeah.
100%.
Good job.
Am I going next and then?
Well, no, let me do this.
What
I'm
are
getting
you
out of here. This is for
You stole that from up
This
front.
is so
you. I didn't steal it from
nice. Thank you.
Happy Mother's Day.
Happy Mother's Day to
Yeah,
all the mothers.
See, that's why I was
Yes.
confused as to what order
Well,
to
I
go.
don't know.
There was a little.
no
This
rhyme
is
or
so
reason
nice of you guys. Thank you so
Anyway,
much.
just for me, if you're an Aggie football fan, or if you're a Cowboys football fan, Dat Wynn, a former Aggie linebacker, former Cowboy linebacker, will be in Laredo on May 29th. This is the second annual Doing the Most Good dinner for the Salvation Army of Laredo. I'm talking about it because I'm going to MC it again. Last year was Randy White, but also because the Salvation Army, if you see what they do, you would definitely get behind their cause. They help a lot of people in Laredo. So if you can make it out there, just scan the QR code and get your tickets. Yeah, no, that's
Very
all right.
cool. Well,
Very good.
thank you.
Thank you, Mindy. Happy Mother's Day. Thank you, Luis.
Happy Mother's Day to
else.
everybody.
Have a blessed rest of your
Mwah.
Sunday.